Hey everyone, Sean Frangella here again with a new Cinema 4D After Effects tutorial in the camera series that I've been putting together. So now that we've went over animation, camera properties, some of these rigs, and a lot of what you can do in Cinema 4D with camera animation, I want to talk about how to utilize Cinema 4D and After Effects at the same time to create this live multi-camera workflow where you can do some of your editing in After Effects, but keep all of it live. And what I mean by that is here in After Effects, I have my Cinema 4D scene imported, and it's cutting between multiple cameras that are set up in Cinema 4D, and it's being brought in through the Cineware layer. And if I look over in Cinema 4D, I have a multi-camera scene with a bunch of different cameras playing that I'm setting up in different parts of my shot. And if I were to change any of this, say I change this floor color from this kind of tan to like a red and just resave this back in After Effects, all of this information is going to be automatically updated and sent over without having to render out separate shots from Cinema 4D and then edit and stitch them together later. So once you have all the camera stuff down, this can be a really, really useful workflow to go through to save you a lot of render time and kind of be doing the editing in After Effects while you're also making some of these decisions and be able to make changes to it very easily if you want to go back into Cinema 4D and update anything. So we'll start in Cinema 4D and get all our cameras set up and then send that over to After Effects. So what I have going on in this scene is a similar setup to some of the recent projects of cameras I've been talking about, with a very simple scene of just a sweep, and there's these couple cubes, and they have a couple animation keyframes on it, and there's a few lights in here. So I'll just do a quick render to point out what we're looking at. And this is all that's in my scene, really just enough to have something going on to point cameras at. The point of all of this one is with the camera work, and I have this set up in my render settings at 960 by 540, which is half of 1080, again, just to be able to quickly demo this and not worry too much about render time. And in my scene, if we look a little further back, I've added up here a basic camera with some just animation keyframe properties on it, this motion camera using one of these built-in rigs that I talked about in a previous tutorial where the guy's kind of walking along, and a close-up camera up here that is attached to a null to follow this cube. So I'll just hop back out of these, and to clean out my scene, I'll just delete all of these cameras and we'll get started from scratch. And so everything is seamless and in one straight through process, I'm just going to go back into After Effects and just close down After Effects, and we'll relaunch that once we get our camera work done. So the idea of shooting a scene with multiple cameras and then editing them together later is that in production you would shoot a scene with one camera, maybe a wide shot to start out with, and then relight the scene and shoot close-ups and maybe integrate different camera styles if you have a big crane shot, or you're on the West Wing or Scrubs and you have these shoulder rig walking and talking things. You would shoot things separately, relight the scene, move the cameras around, edit all together later, and kind of keep going. But since we're in CG land, we don't have to worry about that. We can do it all at once and use some of these Cinema 4D and After Effects tricks to stitch it all together, and we don't have to worry about paying our actors overtime because they're just cubes, and cubes are easier to work with than people. So we'll just start here, and all this will make a lot more sense in a second. So to get started, I'm just going to drop a basic camera in and say that this is my wide camera. So I'm going to hop into my camera view with this button over here, and we'll just do some basic animation with this one. Maybe it goes from here, and at 0 I'll make a keyframe, and then I have a 300 frame scene. So if you're not on a big enough scene, you could always shrink this down or type in 300 if it's on 90 by default, just to get 10 seconds. And then I'll go to the end at 300 and say at the end of the scene, the camera's over here and it's rotated a bit, and this will kind of be our basic wide shot, but still has some interesting camera motion. And then to make it a little more useful, when we talked about some of these tags on this camera, I'm going to add a target tag. So right click, Cinema 4D tags, target, and this would be why it would be useful to watch all of these sequentially, so you can pick up on some of these tags and animation tricks and then use them all for this. So I'll just drop target, and my target object, I'm going to make this cube, which is inside a null. So I'll just drag that cube, and now if I play, my wide shot camera is swinging around and moving kind of very slowly, but always tracking this cube. So that's good. That's, you know, some basic camera motion that we would want. Now let's add our second camera option for this. So I'll hop out of this, and for this one, why don't we use one of these cool rigs? So I'll drop a motion camera on, and remember to not have anything selected. Grab motion camera, and it's gonna drop this guy with this cool shoulder rig option. So I'm gonna grab this whole setup and just kind of move him back into place. So if we imagine there's our wide shot, which is the previous one, and then at the same time or in a different take, we've got our guy in our shoulder rig, and he's kind of walking towards these on this path. And let me just hop into that camera from the correct view and check out what he's seeing. So the way that we can animate this one is on the tag under animation. So make sure you're on animation. Rather than animating with keyframes on position, as I talked about in the last one about rigs, we can animate this camera position A from 0 to 100, and he's going to walk down this path that is this spline that's already in here, and we'll just use the default one. So command click, and then let's say like 200 frames he gets to the end, so let's type in 100 and command click again. And if we back up and play this, now he's walking down this hallway, and let's even go into motion and add maybe 50% footsteps so it really looks like he's walking. And then if I shift F to back up and play in my correct viewport, now we can see we have this alternate camera shot of this same action happening while this wide camera, if I just pop out of both of them, is also getting the same action from a different perspective. So that's good. There's two, but let's take it further. Let's add a third camera, and you figure if these are people or subjects, or even if they're just cubes that are acting, we'd probably have a close-up shot. So I'm going to add another just regular camera and position this one kind of on the cube so we get a good rule of thirds shot of this cube looking at the other pink cube as it rotates around. But what I'm going to do with this one is I have my cube, and my cube is in a null. So if you wanted to make a null on a cube, you just do Option G, and it would make that in a null. But I already have it in a null, so I'm going to, inside that cube null, drag this camera. And because this cube null has a couple position keyframes on it, and the camera is a child of that, now as that null moves, that camera is going to follow it. And that's something from the previous tutorial about camera animation and dropping them into nulls. So you could use this close up. The idea is that it doesn't really matter where the cameras are. The main thing that we'll be talking about here is how to stitch them all together with this workflow. But the point of this is that we have all our actioning happening in our scene in one shot or one take. So now we have our main camera, which I'll just rename this wide camera because that'll be important later. Let's call this close-up one CU camera for close-up. And then we have this motion camera that's walking down. So if we just preview those real quickly, I'll just hop in my wide camera. And this one's, again, our wide shot that's kind of slowly getting the whole scene just to make sure we have coverage if we were doing this in production. Our alternate motion camera, which would be cool to use as different takes of walking down this hallway, looking at this thing. And we could animate him looking up at it, but let's not get too carried away. And then our close-up take, which is just tracking the movement of this cube as it moves up. And the nice thing about doing all of this in CG is that this would be a huge undertaking and issue to do in real production because you'd have to do each take separately and you can't have another camera in the middle of the scene. But since these are CG cameras, we don't have to worry about this guy being in the shot because he's not going to show up there. So this is all I need to do in Cinema 4D to kind of create some of this animation and camera motion. The magic is going to happen when we hop over to After Effects in a minute and use some new After Effects Creative Cloud Cinema 4D Cineware layer options that I've been talking a lot about and you can do some really cool stuff with. So I'm going to save this file importantly. And now I'll start up After Effects, and if we're on After Effects Creative Cloud, we can bring the Cinema 4D file in and do some really cool stuff using that Cineware layer. So I'm in After Effects. I'm just going to make a new project file. So before I get started with anything, I'll just save this project, even though we don't have anything in it. and just call this multicam 02. And then in my project window, I'm gonna double click and just find that Cinema 4D file and bring it directly into my project window. So I'll just grab that multicam file. And if you're using Cinema 4D Lite, you could alternatively start After Effects and do File, New, Maxon Cinema 4D file and camera animation that way, and it would already be here. But this is a workflow option if you're working in a different version of Cinema 4D or you already had it open. But the important thing is that we're getting this into After Effects as a file. So now that it's seeing this Cinema 4D file as footage, what we can do is just grab and drag this onto our new composition button, and it's going to make a new composition that will start rendering in software mode like we see in Cinema 4D and be set to our composition settings that we set up in Cinema 4D. So I got 960 by 540 and the duration of 10 seconds at 30 frames a second. So everything automatically matches, which is good. And I realized I should probably bring in my timeline from my other monitor so everyone can see what the hell's going on. As I mentioned in other tutorials, how this is happening is the Cineware effect that's part of Creative Cloud, which is really great. So it's going to default to software renderer up here. And if I just press 0 to render out a bit of this, you can see that it's rendering this from the camera that we're looking at in Cinema 4D, which in this case is none of them because I hopped out of all of them. And we're getting our animation happening as we would in Cinema 4D. And if we want to see our final rendered composite, we can change it to standard final, and it's going to take a second to render all those calculations, but then it's going to bring up what that scene is going to look like when it is rendered out, and we could do all of our After Effects stuff like curves and color correction and all of that, and a lot of stuff I talk about in other tutorials. But what I want to focus on this one, and I'll drop this down back to software, is once we set up those cameras, how we can use these project settings up here, zoom in a little too far, and change it from Cinema 4D camera to select Cinema 4D camera. And when I do that, it's going to open up this set camera option. And rather than whichever one we happen to have selected, what we can do is click set camera, and it's going to pop open this little dialog, and then we have our cameras as we've named them in Cinema 4D. So I could have this be the wide camera, and now we're seeing this through the wide camera. So if I just scrub through a bit, you can see that our animation is happening and we're getting our wide camera shot. I can set this to our motion camera, which is our guy with our cool shoulder rig. So he's walking along here, and we're seeing this pretty quick live update through our software renderer, as well as, of course, that close-up. And now we're seeing this through that close-up camera. But how do we kind of edit this together? Well, what we can do is take advantage of the set camera. So I'll just do our wide camera and then duplicate this instance of the Cinema 4D file. So I'll just Command D, and let's say the first 2 seconds is this wide shot, and then at second 2, I'll just Option left bracket or trim this down to 2 seconds. We get our shoulder rig camera. So on this first part, I have the first 2 seconds, this instance of the same file, that's our wide camera. And then I've duplicated it and not slide the whole footage because that's going to throw off the timing, but just change the in and out point you can see down here. And then for the second one, I'm going to set camera and go to our motion camera. And then if I just press my in point here, you can see that it's going to look like it seamlessly cuts this, which is cool. This is what we would get in editing, and I have them overlapping, so that's a problem. So I need to remember to zoom in and have it actually cut, so Option right bracket. So we get this cut down here at 2 seconds. So then if I 0 and play this a bit, we see that we're getting this cut on action, which is great. And if we wanted to play by our editing rules, we could even offset this by a frame or two, so we get it jumping slightly before, which is a good editing practice, but let's not worry too much about that now. So to fill out this timeline, let's say we start on our wide shot, that's for 2 seconds, and then we have, say, 2 more seconds of this motion camera, or let's just say that goes just until this gets out of frame, so maybe even less. Maybe we'll just get a short little cut and see how this works out of just 20 frames of that, so Option right bracket that. And again, I'm going to duplicate that whole instance, drag the in point out, and Option left bracket or drag it in, and this will be our close-up. So now once it goes out of frame, onto this third instance, I'll set camera, and go to my close-up, and now we have, again, cutting to this close-up shot, and maybe that goes until 5 seconds, and then I'll just trim that down to 5 seconds. And then we switch back to our wide shot. So what I could do is just duplicate that wide shot one down here and drag it up to the top and just drag the in point to the end, the out point, and then option left bracket right there, and we'll cut back to our wide shot. So now if I zero to RAM preview all of this, we can see that what we're getting is it's playing the sequence and cutting between multiple cameras the whole way, right everywhere I cut in my footage. So there we go, wide shot, close up, and what's nice about this is it's all the same scene. It's not multiple copies of everything. So if I change my mind, which I kind of am right now, I think we need to go to the shoulder rig camera earlier, I can just drag these out and it's the same scene, so I don't have to worry about anything besides these in and out points. These are just the camera instances that I'm looking through. So now I have 1 second of the wide shot, and then we cut to our handheld, goes out of frame, we cut to our close-up, and then back down. And again, I can just keep making changes, so this feels a little off as an edit to me because we're cutting when it's just standing still, and we don't really want to do that. So now let's say 1 second of this. This cuts on 2 seconds, and this is the point of this, is that you can really treat this as an editing project without having to render out all of this footage separately and just do it live here. So maybe this is a good little edit. Let's see if I, on the fly, improve this a bit, and it's making sense from an editing perspective. So we got wide shot, shoulder rig, close up, starts to go down, and then we go back to our wide shots. So maybe one more tweak on this end, and then I'll stop obsessively trying to edit this as if it's a real project, and let's play again, 0. And this is feeling good, and this is the point, again, that you can do this on the fly with the same file and not have to render all this stuff out. So say I was done with this. The second part of why this is useful is I have on each instance of this all of these settings, but for each of these instances there's an apply to all button. So now if I'm working through this in software mode and I'm good and I'm done and I want to render out this whole thing, I can grab any one of these instances, change it to final, and it might take a couple seconds, but it'll render it out as it would from Cinema 4D. And rather than clicking through and changing them all, what I can do is after I change one to final under this renderer, I can click apply to all, and then it's going to apply that decision I just made to all instances of this Cinema 4D Cineware layer. So now they've all been dropped down to standard, final, and ready to go. So I don't have to recreate those steps. So if I click ahead, all standard, final, even though it's separate instances. So this is one super helpful little workflow thing, and why this is so useful, and you can really work live and on the fly. Now, as a workflow, we did our Cinema 4D stuff when we brought it in and changed it to standard final, and that's all good and well if everything goes perfectly with changes and everything is very linear, which never happens because there's always changes. And the benefit of this is that we haven't rendered anything out from Cinema 4D. We've had no render time to deal with until this final part, so we could render this out as a draft, and this is a live pipeline that's going from Cinema 4D to After Effects. So first of all, because I'm in Chicago, a fire truck or police truck is going to go by because that happens every 5 seconds. And after that passes, we can hop back into Cinema 4D, and this file is live and being sent there live. So if I made a bunch of changes to this file, say the floor isn't this tan, we'll go with like a dark navy blue floor, and this cube, let's change from not pink to white, and then the other cube over here, I'll make a new texture and just call this cube 2 and just make a couple little changes that don't really matter, and for whatever reason we end up with this super patriotic looking version of the scene, which is totally fine. And let's say we even change some of this animation or settings. So for my close-up camera, say I like this whole thing, but I want to reposition this a little bit. I want my close-up shot to be kind of close-up but over the shoulder and get a little different perspective. And maybe on this null that's doing the animation, I want that to be a little longer. So I'm gonna change that keyframe, and I save this one file, go back to After Effects, and it's going to automatically live update all instances of it because it's only that one file that it's looking at, and I have everything sent back. And look at that, it's exactly the same as it would be from Cinema 4D. And if I'm working on this, I can grab one of them, change it to software, click apply all. And now if I do a quick RAM preview and kind of scrub through this, we can see that we still have our edit and all those changes are made. And look at this close-up camera. It's the same close-up camera because it's looking for that name of the camera, but we even got the change in perspective and the change in the timing. So I'll just do a whole RAM preview of this. And we have our whole scene. We just updated multiple cameras with the editing in After Effects as you would edit previously in Premiere or Final Cut or however you like to do editing. And we're sending all this over on the fly. We can make editing changes straight in here. We can change the entire file and it's going to update. We can go back and change colors. We can move the cameras around, kind of redo whatever we want in the action that's happening in our scene as well as what's going on with the cameras. And it's gonna live send it over there and save us a ton of time. So if you've been doing 3D for a while, or if you're new to it, this is a hugely beneficial time-saving concept. Because if we're trying to create a little cutscene with multiple cameras, all looking at the same action and same scene, we can save so much render time with not having to edit them out separately and kind of do this rendering on the fly. And then when we're done, just change one of the renders to standard final, and then apply that to all, and we're gonna get the whole scene ready to go. And we could always go back to Cinema 4D, make changes, save the file, come back to After Effects, it's gonna update. And I think I've repeated this sentence about 10 times, but it's fine, I'm just that excited about it. This After Effects Cinema 4D Cineware multi-cam workflow can really be a really great thing to add to your little bag of tricks, in addition to all the animation and camera movement stuff I've been talking about in this series. So this is kind of the big ending one I was thinking of putting all this together and using really the technology at the furthest we can push it as of today in 2014 when all this stuff came out, and really benefit from a lot of this new stuff and the partnership between Cinema 4D and Adobe with this stuff. So I hope you found this one really useful. I'm really excited about this workflow and thought I was being pretty clever when I came up with it, as well as all the previous animation and camera animation ones that I've been putting together. If you haven't seen those yet, check those out, as well as my other animation tutorials. And as always, if you haven't seen some of the other videos or you want to keep up with some of the videos I have on Cinema 4D and After Effects, be sure to subscribe on YouTube and Vimeo /Sean Frangella, and to send questions or comments, facebook.com/Vitale, VIYTALE. And thanks for watching. I appreciate checking these out. I hope you learned a lot, and I'll see you at the next video. Bye.